Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of 3 things I learned last week. Was a little bit surprised when I realized this is the 4th week I'm doing this. I can't believe, we're at the end of the first month. I've been having a lot of fun. I've been getting some great reactions to it. So I hope that you're finding it useful and enjoyable to pay attention to the live stream. For those of you who don't know me, who might be tuning in for the first time, my name is Robyn. I'm the Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Legal Internet Solutions Incorporated. We are a digital marketing agency based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that focuses on law firms and legal services providers. If you want to get in touch with me after the show, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn Messenger. You can also follow me on Instagram, or I'm also on Clubhouse. Here are the ways to get a hold of me. Couple things, housekeeping things, I guess. I posted a poll this morning on my LinkedIn page, and I would love it if you could take a second to participate. I have lots of content I can share all the time. I'm always finding interesting articles, and I have lots of opinions that I share on LinkedIn, but I want to hear about what is useful to you, to the people who actually are paying attention to what I have to say. So please, if you can, take a second and participate in the poll. I'm going to post the link to that post and several other things from today's show in the comments of this live stream afterwards. So please, if you need to find it, feel free to come back to this live stream and find it there. Lesson learned from last week. I went back to watch the live stream and replay, and holy cow, I spoke a million miles a minute. I think I was so just amped up about the topic, in particular, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was excited to have my colleague on the show, and I spoke so fast, I don't even think I could understand myself when I went back to watch it. So if you can't tell, I am purposely trying to speak a little bit in a more measured way today. I want to start off by talking about why 3 things. So we're into this, week 4, and I've had some people ask me why 3 things. And I found this tweet from Adam Grant, actually just this weekend, that I think really encapsulates the essence of what this show is trying to do. So, here he says, insecure people pretend to know things that they don't. Secure people admit what they don't know. I have no problem admitting what I don't know. But proactive people take the initiative to learn what they don't know and acquire expertise from others. There might be some things on here that I know a little bit about, but I've been seeking more information to learn and to grow. I've said this on every episode. I love sharing the things that I know, sharing the things in particular that I learn and that I find interesting. So I hope you all are enjoying this content and this format and learning some things along with me. I want to talk about today, there are 3 topics we're going to talk about, and they're the psychology of flow, the progress principle, and I want to give you an update on some more information about podcasting. And I have a lot of notes because I'm, again, very, very excited about this topic. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Today's show has a lot to do with talking about the challenge as many of my friends and colleagues, legal marketing in the legal industry, are preparing to return to the office. Some of them might be in the office here and there, not necessarily on a strict schedule, but up until at least recently, many firms were talking about, after Labor Day or by the beginning of October, having some sort of return to the office plan in place and their staff being in the office, part-time, hybrid, whatever the case may be. And it really does run the gambit. But the issues, there's so many issues that come up with that. For, aside from the Delta variant and how that might derail things, I know I think I saw something on law.com about that today. There are also, I think, a lot of questions people have been asking themselves about what really matters in terms of their personal life and their productivity and how they find fulfillment in what they do. And, it's more than just whether or not they're physically in the office. There's just a lot that goes into this. And I started learning about the psychology of flow early on in the pandemic. I want to say, I guess everything shut down mid-March. at least in Philadelphia. And by April, May, when I was really, really struggling, I had 3 small children at home with me. My husband was at the fire academy, and I couldn't get anything done. And somehow, I don't even remember how, I stumbled across an article, probably from the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, saying, what you're feeling is the inability to achieve flow. And flow is sort of that state of being completely immersed in a topic, in an activity. And I listened to Amy Cuddy actually talking about this with some people on Clubhouse not too long ago. Funny enough, Amy Cuddy was simultaneously skiing down a mountain while participating in this Clubhouse room. So she was experiencing flow maybe, or maybe not so much actually, if she was diverting her attention. But really just talking about how flow can be achieved in different aspects of life. So certainly in creative pursuits, playing music, design, writing, that might feel like a natural place to achieve flow. It's quiet, you can be completely immersed in the activity. But you even had some athletes on there talking about, how to achieve flow. And the thing that I think is really cool about flow is not just talking about how to become completely immersed in these activities, but talking about what the characteristics of flow are and what the benefits are. So if you look at flow on this, I think this is from Wikipedia, on this chart, the vertical axis are, challenges from low to high, challenge of that activity. And then the horizontal axis is your ability, your skill related to the activity. And so flow is in the upper right-hand quadrant because it is a highly challenging activity for you, but you also have a high skill in it. And sort of that's that magical sweet spot when you get to achieve flow. Some characteristics of flow: the activity is intrinsically rewarding. You enjoy doing it just for the sake of doing it. There are some clear goals. So the activity should be challenging, but still rewarding and attainable. There's a complete focus on the activity itself, and that you have personal control over that situation. So think about what I said about my challenge with flow back early on, in mid 2020, have children running in and out of my office. I have no control whatsoever on anything that I was doing. But the thing that's sort of great about it is that feeling of serenity, and the just lack of awareness of the outside world, because I'm completely, you can be completely focused on it and lose track of time. But so here's the great thing about flow. And when you think about the things that you're doing and that you're immersing yourself in, if you are able to achieve that state, here's what you're really doing for yourself. You're creating a greater sense of enjoyment and fulfillment in the activity that you're doing, and therefore potentially greater happiness and greater motivation to do that activity. As we think about that in our work lives, if you are challenged with the work that you're doing and you're able to fully immerse yourself in it, you're going to have motivation to keep advancing yourself in that activity and keep advancing yourself in that skill, which will ultimately enhance your performance, because you're going to be learning and developing new skills to continue to achieve that next level of challenge. At some point you're going to master the thing, whatever the thing is. And it's going to be harder and harder for you to achieve flow theoretically in that thing, that activity, because it's not as challenging for you. So again, it has to be, if you look at the chart, it has to be a balance between challenge and your ability. But it just creates room for more creativity overall. So I just think flow is a very, very cool topic. It's something that interests me a lot. There's a lot written out there about flow and what it means for us in our world, both personally and professionally. But what does that have to do with leadership and business? Which actually leads me to my next topic, which is the progress principle. Actually, let me back it up. I was forwarded a really interesting article by my friend, Rebecca Nasi. If you don't know Rebecca, she and her husband, David Ackert, are co-founders of Ackert Inc. Rebecca is also an executive coach. And she forwarded me this really interesting article about the power of small wins. I think she was trying to just lift my spirits in terms of, feeling frustrated with something and just showing me that there are small wins that you can really feel like you're making progress, you're achieving something. And because you have those small wins, you feel fulfilled. Which, diving into the article, I learned that this is actually based on a book called The Progress Principle. And if you can't see it, if it's really small on your screen, the progress principle, the subtitle, using small wins to ignite joy, engagement, and creativity at work. So here's the thing that's really cool, in my opinion, about the progress principle. It's the concept is knowing how to leverage small wins to create a sense of fulfillment and therefore great inner work lives. Because people who have great inner work lives have a consistently positive outlook on their team and their organization, and they feel good about the work that they do. Okay, so let's take a step back and just sort of talk about inner work lives for a second. So Harvard Business Review defines inner work lives as the dynamic interplay between perceptions, emotions, and motivation. So perceptions, how are you understanding your environment? How are you understanding the tasks, the projects that you are being assigned or your team is being assigned compared to, a similarly situated team next door, or sort of what's going on in the environment of your company, what's happening, what do you know about, do you have a lack of transparency into, what's just your perception of your work environment. Your emotions, your mood at work, or how you react to situations. So that could be things that you bring to the table or your reaction to your perception of the situation. And then your motivation, your grasp of what needs to be done and your drive to do it at any given moment. So having a strong inner work life is really crucial. Having, I guess, a productive, a positive inner work life is truly crucial to feeling fulfilled and feeling motivated at work. And I'm going to put a link to this book. Again, many links in the comments. I'll put a link to the HBR article about the power of small wins. I'll put a link to the Amazon link for this book in the comments below after I'm done. But so here's what's really interesting about the book. And it feels, when I started reading it, I was kind of like, this feels obvious. But then as you read the case studies, it's 5 different case studies where all of the employees are related, to a particular project or a particular section, took daily logs, created daily logs of how they felt about their day, about how their work went, about, what happened, their interactions at work. And it was real-time research and information available to these researchers, these authors, to sort of review how things were going in these companies and be able to synthesize that into this book to talk about like how as managers and as leaders, we can foster environments where things like small wins are rewarded, are highlighted, are, congratulated. That's not just, oh, you only did this little thing, that doesn't count, we haven't reached our goal. You're realizing that even that small little achievement is actually really motivating for your staff. And the first case study I find so interesting, in particular because it hit very close to home for me, talks about an environment where the management team came in, the production team, it was at a consumer goods manufacturer. The production team had a lot of autonomy in terms of creating priorities and product developments and all sorts of things. And a management team came in after an acquisition and basically took all of that autonomy away. And within 18 months, 2 years, this team that had once felt so positively about their work environment and about the company, went from having really strong inner work lives to feeling very destitute and feeling very marginalized. And ultimately, the company, according to the book, the company folded. All of the case studies are anonymized, of course, in the book, but ultimately that company folded, and probably in large part because the workforce had very little, if any, inner work life. So I think about this as a leader. I've got a team that I work with every day. How do I motivate them to want to achieve things? How do we celebrate the small wins? And how do we incentivize our team to find that intrinsic motivation? It comes down to creating an environment where people can have that really strong inner work life. So this is one of those topics that I don't have these tangible takeaways for you necessarily, but I just think it's really interesting. I'm reading more and more about it, so I really wanted to share it with you. Lots to read in the comments and the links that I'm going to post in the comments after this show. Last thing I want to talk about is podcasting. So we talked about over the past couple of weeks, okay, so I have this video and I can download the audio. and post that audio as a podcast, which I've actually gotten that all set up. And we're working to get our podcasting host, SoundCloud, connected with Apple Podcasts and any other podcast, any place you can get podcasts, so that people, if they want to consume this content, can do so as a podcast, because it is just essentially me talking. And I'm going to be honest, I have been reluctant to get into podcasting because I sort of have, maybe this goes back to imposter syndrome a little bit. What is the unique thing that I want to talk about that hasn't already been talked about or discussed before? Obviously, I've gotten over that on LinkedIn and when it comes to live streaming, but I still sort of had that hurdle to get over with podcasting. But the more I researched podcasting, I found some really interesting things that have really motivated me to dive in. So you may or may not realize this, but podcasts are sort of having a moment. They've, of course, been around for a while, but they are increasingly becoming a popular form of content distribution. Maybe they always have been, popular to a certain degree, but I think more and more, especially in business, podcast hosts and teams are getting into it to really share information. I mean, I think about how I consume podcasts. So I don't listen to music when I'm running or exercising. I listen to podcasts because for me, I can completely focus and immerse myself in that podcast and think about what's being said. And I don't have to think about the physical activity that I'm actually doing. So that's how I consume them. But some interesting stats. There are 8,334 branded podcasts on Apple Podcasts. And for top rated Google podcasts, 73% of podcasters identify as male. So that means the podcast hosts, nearly 3/4 of them, or essentially 3/4 of them, identify as male. Other data across other platforms beyond Google show as much as 87% of top rated podcasts are hosted by individuals who identify as male. So it really depends on your syndication platform and how they sort of rate the top rated podcast. But any way you slice it, the great majority of podcast hosts are male. So that feels like a challenge, laying down the gauntlet. So I wanted to think about how I could, if I could, come up with a podcast that makes sense for my audience. And I have some ideas around that, I'll probably share relatively soon, but it's still sort of in its infancy. It's not ready for prime time. But if you're thinking about doing podcasting, if you're sort of in the same stage of the journey as I am, here are a few things to think about. First, you want to think about your format. Is your format going to be an interview style? So that's a show that brings on a host and a guest. The host asks the guest questions, talk back and forth. Or is it going to be a cast chat? So maybe I have a co-host and my co-host and I talk about things relative, if it'd be like if I brought on a co-host for 3 things I learned last week. Or similar, is it going to be a debate format, co-host or, guests where, one group or one person takes point A, takes point, and then the other group or person takes counterpoint and debate back and forth? Or is it going to be a narrative, a journalistic style podcast that talks about, it's heavily researched, it's likely very heavily scripted, and it has a very strong and engaging storyline? So that's number one. What is your podcast format going to look like, and what is the right format for your audience? So actually, maybe like step one, I really skipped over this. Step one is, who's your audience? And then once you think about who your audience, what's the right format for that audience? And then, and this is where I got a little bit overwhelmed because I've been very agile and been doing a lot of this production stuff on my own. I'm still a one-woman show for 3 things I learned last week. But when it comes to a really highly developed and produced podcast, you need to think about who your production team is. So you need a showrunner. It's kind of like your executive producer / director. You're probably going to need a producer or 2. That person helps establish the content and the narrative, and helps write and edit the scripts and really, make sure that it's all on brand and on message and it all comes together. You're going to need an editor. So that person oversees the development of the story and the idea and gives feedback. A host, I think in this case, for me, it would likely be me. But that person is a storyteller who shapes the show through their sort of decisions, and is sort of it is of course the front face of the show. And then you're going to need a engineer, sound editor, person who sort of puts the whole thing together. So you've got the editor who's more on the content side, but then you've got the production editor who's actually making sure that your intro and your outro are consistent. If you have any, what's the word? And if you have any messaging that comes at the beginning, middle, and or end of each of your podcasts all the time, that's pre-recorded, that each of your segments are, naturally flow, etc. And if you get to the point where you can monetize your podcasts, that can work, to make sure that there are natural chapter breaks so that advertising can be put in at the right time. So podcasting is totally attainable. It just probably takes like with anything that is worthwhile, it's going to take a little bit of effort to get up and running. So I'm excited as I continue to develop potentially this other podcast to share a little bit more about it and be, maybe this will be like my online journal, sort of sharing about the progress of that and how that's coming along. And that is my show for today. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one more thing. In the vein of talking about podcasts and highlighting women, podcasts hosted by women, I was recommended this podcast, and I listened to all 6 episodes of it yesterday because it totally sucked me in. So Dr. Death, this podcast by Wondery, is about a real life neurosurgeon in Texas who was awful. And the woman who researched and hosted this show has done, a lot of research, pulling sort of the whole story and everything together. There are now actually 3 seasons of Dr. Death. I believe the first season is just this one doctor, and then each subsequent season goes on to, scarily enough, other doctors, but a little bit kind of crazy at the end here. But trust me, it's a really, especially if you're into true crime podcasts, this is a really, really, really interesting podcast. So I highly recommend it. And I had to put it up because, of course, it's a podcast hosted by a woman. So thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I'm excited to join you next week. I have some ideas I want to share with you, what I'm working on in terms of building an Instagram presence to bridge my personal and my professional online personas, worlds, and some of the elements of that go into that. So thank you, everybody, and have a great week. Bye-bye.